Coming up next to This Week in Computer Hardware, AMD NAVI GPU rumors, and the X570 gonna need a fan. Walmart's got cheap tablets, Panic cranks out a new handheld gaming device, and Qualcomm's fighting antitrust. All that and more coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 518, recorded on May 23rd, 2019. Antitrust pain, AMD GPUs, cheap gaming, and cheaper tablets. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch weekly show that aims to bring you all the hardware news, and I'm cutting the long, dragged-out opening short this week because there is craziness afoot in hardware town. So let's get to it. Joining me, ladies and gentlemen, from PCPer.com, Mr. Sebastian Peak. Which disturbing development would you like to tackle first?
I'm not physically or mentally prepared for any of this, but you know, Computex is coming. So all the leaks and the rumors, and because of course you can't wait 4 more days. It's got to be endless.
More days.
You know,
4 more days. Yeah. So Computex, if you're not familiar with it, and you should be at this point, runs May 28th to June 1st this year. It's for all intents and purposes, it's the biggest computer show in the world, or probably the most important in a lot of ways, if you are a system integrator or builder or cover hardware for a living. You know, earlier this week, we had some big fat AMD leaks ahead of AMD's keynote that will be held on May 27th, the day before Computex opens. WCCF Tech has a pretty thorough write-up on it. And what it comes down to is $499 for the new NAVI XT RTX 3080. Let me try that again. The NAVI XT RX 380, which is supposed to be slightly faster than RTX 2070. It'll cost... RTX 2070 is $100 more than that $499 price. The NAVI Pro RX 3070 is going to sell for $399, which is slightly faster than a GeForce RTX 2060. WCCF Tech notes that the article that leaked all this was pulled, which led them to believe it was probably legit. We're going to know more next week, like whether or not the June 10th sales launch is legit. I'm gonna say it right now. I'm going to brazenly assume that these are not doing any ray tracing. I'm also going to brazenly assume that the vast majority of the people buying GPUs right now that haven't already bought an RTX card from NVIDIA are not particularly motivated by RTX because there are so few games at this point.
Right, and then the graphics engines that have begun to, like, we've seen stuff back from like GDC where the various graphics engines were going to be supporting ray tracing going forward, but that's going to be something that's not hardware dependent. So it'll work on AMD, NVIDIA. It doesn't require RTX cards. So, and that stuff is all like roadmap, like this spring going into this summer, and you know, we actually have to see games develop with those updated engines, or games get updates. So yeah.
So you found go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly what you were about to say. The updated article from 3 hours ago, WCCF Tech had sourced from a leaker that's well known, Komachi, on Twitter, which has been taken down. The tweet was taken down, which, you know, again, lends credibility whether they want that to or not. But some details, architectural details about Navi, and they're talking 40 compute units, each with 64 stream processors. The big news would be, if this is accurate, that it has 8 shader engines where the previous design was capped at 4 per die. And that was always a limitation, and you had that, like, even with the Vega 7 when that came out, that was still capped at 4096 streaming processors, whereas if you were to double, you know, theoretically, you'd be able to go far above that, although the specs they're talking about are something a lot more reasonable. 2560 shader processors, 8 gigs of RAM, 256-bit bus, and they're targeting the RTX 2070 level of performance and perhaps a bit higher. So that'll depend on clocks, I'm sure. And according to their leak, they're saying $499, so priced right along with the 2070. So it feels like the same strategy they had with the Radeon 7, where they felt they could go head-to-head in certain games with the RTX 2080, so they priced it at $699. And this card apparently can go toe to toe with the RTX 2070. So they're pricing it at $499. So
and it's
we'll
10
see.
more because it's a 70 instead of a 60 and an 80 instead of a 70.
Well, of course. I mean, if I'm shopping at Micro Center and I see a 2070 and a 3070, why would I get the 2070?
I don't know, but you'd actually be getting, I think, you'd actually be looking for the 3080 in that price bracket. But the other thing that came out of the article is that we may see, bigger GPUs, more stream processors, because they also point out that, since Fiji, they haven't done more than 4,096 stream processors.
Yeah,
so that would give them add additional stream processors. They could add more than 64 IOPs in future designs. So that ups the pixel throughput. It's a compelling kind of, I feel like hair may have been pulled down to NVIDIA headquarters when that was posted. Are you excited about this one, or are you just kind of hanging fire?
I am more
I'm
so
gonna
than I was before.
Okay, I was going to say I was going to assume like even if they have seeded you with cards to create reviews to release on the announce, you of course would not be able to. I guess the review date that they suggested was like June 7th. But I was going to say, like, even if you have cards, the NDA is so terrifying, you won't speak anything about it for fear that your child will instantly vaporize and be teleported to Canada, where it will grind out chips for the rest of its life. But, are you excited about these?
I am, if they've made these architectural improvements. If this is just speculation, then it'll be a lot less compelling when it comes out. But if they are even going to attempt to compete in the $400 to $500 range with these. We were originally thinking mid-range, and I've gotten used to AMD mid-range being like the RX 580 and the 480 before it, where you're talking a $200 to $250 card. So if they're up to $400 or $500, then I would expect much higher performance, which is something I didn't really think they were going to do, especially if this is yet another kind of massaging of the GCN architecture they've had for 4 or 5 years now. So if they've actually managed to overcome that limitation and can put up to 8 shader engines on a die, that's a big deal. And it really doesn't matter if they're still on GCN, that we will see. It's just, another wait and see. What bothers me is that we're talking Computex is right around the corner. We're like 4 days away.
Right.
But they also have that event they've teased at E3. And if it's a gaming event for E3, that sounds like graphics to me. And I've not been pre-briefed on any of this stuff, but I wonder how many details we'll get at Computex. I'm sure we'll get all sorts of Ryzen details. I don't know how much we'll actually get for Navi if they're holding something back for a big reveal at E3.
And the big reveal. So we wait, as usual, with bated breath to see what the legit story is, or at least the legit, the legit announcement, followed by the legit reviews, which tell us what the legit story is. MSI was talking about AMD X570 motherboards ahead of Computex, and you were kind of fascinated that they require active chipset cooling, so fans on the chipset to make these perform at top. To make these perform, I mean, it's they're required.
It's a lot of wattage going into that chipset. I believe Jeremy at our site, he said it was 15 watts from what he heard.
Ow.
So it's not like they have a choice. MSI, this is interesting that they even did this. They had an MSI insider stream yesterday, and the link still exists. I was actually watching it this morning, and about the hour and a half mark in the stream, they pull out these motherboards, and these are not officially announced motherboards. We've just seen a couple of leaks. We didn't even see all the details about one of the boards they had. And they're showing the board and talking about the VRMs, talking about the heat sinks, power delivery, and then they were showing the active cooling. And in a quote that PC Games N pulled, they said, of course nobody wants this, talking about the fans, but it's much needed for this platform. And they kind of justify it by saying there are speedy things inside. Well, there's a lot of heat to dissipate is the problem. So they have to have a fan. Although apparently they're using a 0 RPM idle, so similar to modern graphics card, where until you're actually pushing it and until its temperatures reach a certain threshold, it's not even going to spin. But I imagine if you're using it to game, that's going to happen quickly, and then there's going to be this little 30 or 40 millimeter fan whirring along on your motherboard. Although these actually looked a little bit bigger than that. So maybe it's like a 50 millimeter fan. But we will see how loud these are. I'm sure it's every X570 board is going to have some sort of active cooling on it.
I mean, what's the big draw to the X570 chipset at this point?
And it's hard to say because we haven't seen anything official on it. We've seen from the Chip Hell forums, somebody had constructed this diagram of the chipset and all of its potential features. The fact that it adds 14 lanes of PCIe 4. Originally, we had heard that the processor is going to support PCIe Gen 4. So if it's like an Intel chipset, there's so many lanes from the processor, so many lanes from the chipset, and potentially you could have all these extra lanes. Like it was 16 lanes going to PCIe, so you could have like 1 by 16 Gen 4 or 2 by 8 or 1 by 8 and then split up the rest with your like Gen 4 storage if that exists. So I imagine there has to be some sort of selling point beyond just additional Gen 4 PCIe compatibility, because otherwise you could get an X470 board and update the BIOS and just use that. So if anything, if they've improved storage, if they've improved USB throughput, since they are using, I believe, their own controller this time instead of just dropping in an as media controller, that could be better. We'll have to do side-by-side comparisons. I'm sure that a lot of sites will be doing that when these boards come out.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the 300 and 400 series chipsets were created by as media. I brazenly assumed that those were in-house designs. So this is like the first AMD design. I mean, I'll quote PC Games. This is the first in-house AMD designed motherboard silicon of the Zen era. And it's also crazy. Like, yes, they are jumping from a 5-watt to a 15-watt part. Quote, there are a lot of speedy things inside.
Maybe we'll see some mods. You can put like a tower air cooler on your south bridge and run it in silent mode.
I'm smelling liquid cooling from the motherboard. Oh, goodness.
That's what zip ties are for.
Zip ties, duct tape, glue, Gorilla Tape. Yeah, I'm admiring. You did a review of EVGA GeForce GTX 1650 SC Ultra, subtitled TU117 Revisited. But mostly, I'm admiring the dimples on the fan, and all I can think is like golf balls. This is an overclocked GTX 1650. Was it miraculous and awe-inspiring?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, it's a nice card, and one of the things about it is EVGA, the previous 2 16 series cards that I've had from them were those really thick triple slot cards. Right. I call them a 2.75 slot. And even though they were just under 190 millimeters deep, because they required 3 expansion slots, you couldn't put them in most mini ITX cases. There's just no way without modifying the case. So this is a slightly longer design from them, but it's still right around 200 millimeters. This one comes in at like 202.1 millimeters, I think, total. But it's a dual fan design. And with the price point they're hitting, if you look at this, it has like a metal backplate. It's nicely finished. The last 1650 that I reviewed was the MSI Gaming X version, which was pretty significantly overclocked. The stock clock on this is a boost clock of 1665 megahertz. The MSI from the previous review is 1860 megahertz boost clock, and this matches that and has the dual fan design and has a metal backplate, but it's $10 less. So I was intrigued because they're hitting a little bit better of a price point. $149 is what NVIDIA had announced the GTX 1650 at. So for these cards to come out with 195 megahertz overclock on the core and charge you $20 for it, that's pretty fair. I mean, you'd like to see, the same level of performance for less, but This card, when I compared it to the previous benchmarks from that MSI, after doing some quick overclocking, I pushed another 90 megahertz on the core. Without adjusting voltage, it just pushed the power limit up to 106%, which is the limit on this card. It was very, very slightly faster, but we're talking a couple of frames per second. It was disappointing to see that even after finding a nice additional overclock and pushing this to a 1950 megahertz boost, which was consistently hitting 2040 to 2055 megahertz in games, it still is only good for maybe 1.5 to 2.5 frames per second over that MSI Gaming X. But that's a similarly factory overclocked card, so it just feels like this is the practical limit of GTX 1650. And if this is the limit, it's not really gaining any ground on the 1660, and it's pretty obvious from the performance and from the pricing gap between 1650 and 1660 that they're going to have to release something in the middle. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they come out with like a 1650 Ti to bridge the gap.
I can wait for that one. So earlier this year, moving directions from one affordable device to another. Earlier this year, it came out that Walmart was working on its own branded tablets, Android tablets, and they started going on sale this week with the Walmart On, which is spelled ONN, because that's one more N, starting at $64. I like the gentle snark that Ben Schoon applied at 9 to 5 Google, and not impressive on the spec sheets by any means. That said, they are using the Play Store. They didn't create their own walled garden Amazon style. But for $64, you get a 1280 by 800 IPS display, some type of 1.3 gigahertz quad-core processor, 2 gigs of RAM, and 16 gigabytes of storage. So, for one, it's funny because we took a look at the new OnePlus 7 Pro on TechThing this week. Shannon had a great review of that, and it is available in a 12 gigabyte of RAM version, which I think it was Android Authority, when talking about RAM amounts on Android devices, referred to essentially as ridiculous and a complete waste of time. But when you're looking at Android, 6 to 8 gigabytes is a real sweet spot, because it means you can keep 5 or 6 apps completely in main system memory. And that one of the advantages of going from 4 to 6 gigabytes, or goodness help me, in my case, say 3 to 6 gigabytes on my next phone from my current phone, is that you will be able to keep multiple apps open, and you will not have to wait for the system to load the app, the other app, once you get up to 3 or 4 apps from storage rather than from system RAM. That said, if you basically have a kid that wants to play Minecraft and or watch videos, this is going to be more than up to the task, assuming, of course, you can fit enough video for them or connect them to an online service, because 16 gigabytes of storage. A 0.3 megapixel front-facing camera, 2 megapixel rear camera, which is right up there with the tiny T9 text-based phone that my son is carrying right now. The 10.1 inch models pretty much have the same spec, but as of the publication time of the article, nobody knew what the resolution on that was. So I thought this was kind of interesting. Apparently 9 to 5 Google reports that there's going to be a third tablet coming along with a keyboard accessory. The 8-inch model, this $64, the 10.1-inch model, $79, and I should be able to pick one of those up now. So
I encourage you to do so and tell me what you think. But I can't imagine, even at $64, the only thing that gives me hope is that lower screen resolution. If this was like 1920 by 1080 and using a very low-end 1.3 gigahertz quad core, like a MediaTek processor from like 2011, that would be like the scale of what a supermarket branded tablet might how it might perform goes probably from it's like despondent to woeful to opprobrious and unusable. So
Well,
I'm being snarky, and I'm being an elitist about my tablets. I would like to see something a little bit more powerful, maybe at $89 or $99, but.
Walmart makes stuff to a price point, and they generally make stuff to the lowest price point they can, but to put this in perspective, a Samsung Galaxy Tab A is selling, 8 gigabyte Android 5.1. That's going to run you, I want to say $130 by comparison, and that's with a 1.3 gigahertz quad core. That's with, 1.5 gigabytes of RAM and 8 gigabytes of ROM. So if you look at, at a spec for spec comparison, as miserable as that specs on that Walmart On sound, they're probably pretty competitive at the low end Android tablet area. They're not going to make it.
Yeah. I just think about
this,
like usability type stuff, like how responsive is the digitizer?
Right.
Did they do any kind of optimization, or did they just throw Android on like a bare bone laptop they got at a certain price? I've seen and used some of these sub $100 tablets before, and it's like a swipe followed by a pause, followed by an eventual action, which may or may not conflict with the one that you did while waiting for that action.
Yeah, it's actually in stock at the nearest San Leandro. I'm very curious because some of the reviews are enthusiastic. It's funny to watch because there's like 3 really excited reviews and 1 really angry review.
That sounds normal. This thing doesn't work, and it wasn't connected to their Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there's only 4 reviews, so it like drops the overall review. I'm really curious because I can't find out if there's actually a micro SD card slot on here, and if there is, I guess
I'm
going to Walmart.
Gigabyte card in there, yeah.
The other thing that was funny this week, we were talking about on Tech Thing, was that the Oculus Quest and Rift are, they're in stock at our local Best Buy, which means if you've been thinking about buying one, they're probably in stock at your local Best Buy too. Because it was, I am curious to see, how people react to those. Because, we interviewed Norman Chan over at Tested.com that had a pretty early review on the Quest. And he, as somebody who's been deep in VR for a long time, he was really excited about it, primarily because, the lack of a cable interfering with his gaming lifestyle, and the inside-out cameras, which worked phenomenally well. I'm really curious. Like, I want to get one, but I'm waiting for a bit, see the initial flurry settle down, make sure all the games are shipping. But if you're thinking about buying an on-Android tablet or an Oculus Quest, they probably are in stock at a brick and mortar store near you. So I'll take the hit on the tablet for you. So.
Thank you. It's a sacrifice I'm willing to make.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. It's probably a shorter drive to my nearest Walmart, too. Oh, my goodness. We're going to slide rather quickly through some hardware news kind of on the legal front. Qualcomm joins, I want to say, China, the EU, and South Korea as declaring or finding Qualcomm in violation of U.S. antitrust law. It's pretty simple. I pulled an article up from Extreme Tech, but Apple and Qualcomm, it's a great opening line. Joel Fruska wrote this one. Apple and Qualcomm may have dropped their worldwide lawsuit war against each other, but that wasn't the only battle Qualcomm faced. So the Federal Trade Commission has been basically alleging antitrust abuses, illegal behavior, and as of May 21st, U.S. District Court Judge Lucy Coe found that Qualcomm had violated the Federal Trade Commission Act. Qualcomm, of course, immediately appeals because that's what giant companies with lots of lawyers on retainer do. Quote, we strongly disagree with the judge's conclusions, her interpretation of the facts, and her application of the law. Don Rosenberg, general counsel for Qualcomm Response. This is one of those things that's going to probably work its way as close to the Supreme Court as it can. But the judge was pretty serious. It was just, kind of smacked Qualcomm down. Qualcomm's licensing practices have strangled the competition in the CDMA and premium LTE modem chip market for years and harmed rivals, OEMs, and end consumers in the process. Laid down some pretty hardcore obligations. Qualcomm must not condition the supply of modem chips on a customer's patent license statements, and Qualcomm must negotiate or renegotiate license terms with customers in good faith under conditions free from the threat of lack of access to or discriminatory provision of modem chip supply or associated technical support or access to software, which I think is a way of saying you can't punish people for not buying your chips. You still have to make the modems available to them. Qualcomm must make exhaustive SCP licenses available to modem chip suppliers on fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory terms, and to submit as necessary to arbitral or judicial judgment resolution. Qualcomm may not enter express or de facto exclusive dealing agreements for the supply of modem chips. Qualcomm may not interfere with the ability of any customer to communicate with a government agency about a potential law enforcement or regulatory matter. In order to ensure Qualcomm's compliance with the above remedies, the court orders Qualcomm to submit to compliance and monitoring procedures for a period of 7 years. Specifically, Qualcomm shall report to the FTC on an annual basis Qualcomm's compliance with the above remedies ordered by the courts. Apparently there are exclusivity deals with Apple, BlackBerry, LG, Samsung, Vivo, interfered with regulations apparently paid Samsung $100 million, to keep them quiet. And Coe's like, Judge Coe said Qualcomm's failure to alter its unlawful licensing practice despite years of foreign government investigations, finding, and fines suggests an obstinance that a monitoring provision may address. The other thing that came down in the lawsuit or for the judge's findings was that, Qualcomm can't raise the rates on modems or the royalty rates on modems if somebody chooses to use non-Qualcomm chips. And this is, kind of the stuff we heard Intel doing to beat up on AMD. When Intel was dealing with antitrust. This is how one of the reasons Microsoft got in trouble. So, this came out of the Ninth Circuit. React to that as you will. They've requested a stay of ruling. And, this is really messy going into 5G. Of course, because Intel realized that they couldn't build 5G silicon with Apple being left holding the bag. Huawei's 5G technology is facing some distribution issues in the U.S. We'll discuss in a moment. And, so I'm very, very curious to see what happens next. And it's going to involve lawyers and appeals. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes and how long it does or does not take to filter down to have any meaningful impact on consumers. 19-05-21 FTC versus Qualcomm judicial findings. It is a scintillating read, but I suggest you skip on over to the nice people at Extreme Tech to read their summary. Meanwhile, Broadcom's chip unit is targeted in a widening U.S. antitrust probe. A scintillating read on Bloomberg, and so again, did they abuse their dominance in the markets, and harm competition in Wi-Fi and the switch chip markets, and that's going to be interesting to watch how it rolls, because Broadcom doesn't own Wi-Fi, but boy, are they a heavy player. And that's that investigation just beginning. And then, of course, there's the whole U.S. ban of Huawei, which, of course, immediately received sort of a 3-month stay from the Commerce Department. Ron Amadeo over at Ars Technica basically summarizes that, they're, in terms of hardware, they don't really have much in the way of suppliers that are impacted. But the software, i.e. Android, and their access to it will be dramatically impacted. Of course, that's in the wake of the Huawei ban that President Trump set down. And, Google, Qualcomm, Broadcom, Intel all cut ties with Huawei. Microsoft has pulled Huawei's MateBook X Pro from its online store. ARM sent a memo telling its staff to stop working with Huawei. This is heavy. I cannot understate what a big deal this is. It'll be interesting to see Huawei's reaction. Huawei has been working on an alternate operating system. They can, of course, use the open source version of Android, but they will not have access to things like the Play Store or fundamental apps that people associate with the Android experience. So that's going to be pretty brutal. If you have a Huawei device, it could impact your life in interesting and kind of irritating ways. So,
and the ARM news yesterday, I believe it was, that basically ARM had revoked their license to Huawei, whose HiSilicon division makes the Kirin SoCs that are in their high-end phones, like these phones with the crazy, like, beautiful cameras. They make great hardware. The problem is Kirin is as close to vanilla ARM as you can get in the high-end phone market. They're not using custom GPU cores like Adreno from Qualcomm. They're using whatever the latest Mali or newer generation graphics. They're using ARM Cortex CPU cores, and without that ARM license, they're going to have to revert to some other design. And apparently, they did have some designs kind of on the back burner in anticipation of something like this happening, but I don't know what sort of performance impact that would be. I imagine it'd be pretty significant, because to compete with Qualcomm to this point, Kirin has been leveraging basically the absolute newest ARM IP, running at as aggressive a clock speed as it can, and just thermals being their only issue for sustained clocks to try to beat the latest Snapdragon. And without that, it's a completely different world. But really, they won't be able to compete in the US at all if they don't have the Play Store. So I guess that's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, no, it is not. The shortest possible statement is Huawei's in trouble, in a pretty intense way. The other thing that was interesting that came out this week, while we're on the diatribe of legal weirdness, is it's a nice article on The Verge, or a good article on The Verge, an interesting article on The Verge. Apple and Amazon cut a deal that upended the Mac resale market. 6 months after Apple moved in, small sellers have all but disappeared from the Amazon marketplace. That's kind of, the article's, it's a real nice piece of journalism, right? It starts out with a gentleman named John Bumstead, who is searching for his products on Amazon.com and waiting to see what happens, because he is a small business owner that refurbishes and sells old MacBooks, and he had been talking with Motherboard, and the listings just dried away, and he's the deal that Apple made with Amazon means you can no longer sell, quote, new or refurbished Apple products on Amazon Marketplace, which is the third-party seller network that runs on Amazon. And that the marketplace, this is I'm going to quote this. Some financial analysts estimate that Amazon Marketplace is worth more than double the company's internal e-commerce business, i.e. everybody kind of rides along with Amazon, is contributing about $250 billion of revenue versus the $125 billion of the internal e-commerce system, because it is such a huge and important player in online sales. And so if you want to sell Apple products on Amazon, it's pretty crazy. You either purchase $2.5 million worth of refurbished inventory every 90 days from Apple itself, quote, or through a retailer with more than $5 billion in annual sales, which would be like a wireless carrier, big box retailers like Target or Walmart. And I apologize, I am heavily quoting from Nick Stat's article on TheVerge.com, and I'm going to stop right now because if you're kind of curious what happens when two gigantic companies start playing nice together and start impacting the ability to target your ability to sell alternative versions of products or older versions of products or products that don't immediately contribute to multi-billion-dollar companies' bottom line sales of new products, it's a pretty big deal. It's a good read. It's a thorough read, and it's, it's one of the challenges of dealing with Amazon. Again, a lot of, two elephants mates. You don't want to be the hummingbird that was in the tree nearby, which is really an awkward and ugly metaphor even for me. But I'm curious to see. What kind of happens next. Because when I first looked at this article, I was like, I won't be able to buy iPhone covers. Then I'm like, oh wait, it's not quite that brutal. But if you had bought devices like this, refurbished devices and stuff on Amazon, they're gone. Because the deal says, hey, you're either huge or you come to Apple, period. It's, kind of in these, this is not antitrust. This is not, I don't think anything's litigatable here at this point, but it is, it's frustrating. In other Apple news, they have yet another iteration of their Butterfly keyboard system using, quote, new materials that they believe are going to eliminate or at least reduce double and missed key presses. They've also expanded the keyboard service program, which is nice because I've known some people that were impacted by this. And, it's really kind of, it's just people get angry when their incredibly expensive laptop breaks in a way that everybody seems to know, but the company won't admit. So, I was going to say, apparently from day one, this new keyboard design has already been added to the list, right? For their repair program. Yeah, and I saw this because the Prince of Snark himself, Paul Thurrott, on Twitter, retweeted this information with "They finally nailed it" as his caption. So, don't worry, buy with confidence because your brand new 6-core $1,800 MacBook Pro is already part of a repair and service program for its keyboard, which will undoubtedly fail. I'm going to make a brutal comparison here. My cousin owned a Chrysler two-door sporty sedan thing back in the day. And it was interesting because there was this, this like 7-year, 100,000-mile warranty on the drivetrain. He said one day, it's good that I have this 7-year, 100,000-mile warranty because I think he was on like his second engine and third transmission or something. And he's a mechanical person. He was taking care of the vehicle. But, the important things like the engine and the transmission were having profound issues. And, generally speaking, whether you're buying an inexpensive Chrysler product or a premium device from Apple, you would like the core components to be manufactured in a way that you don't know going in that they are going to disintegrate. Now, don't get me wrong, right? I don't expect, transmissions to last 1 million miles. It'd be nice. I did have a 500,000-mile warranty on the truck or the transmission I put in my truck. But, I understand that things break down, things tear up. But it's pretty obvious that Apple's quest for thinness, went a bridge too far, and is continues even as they try desperately to fix it, is continuing to create problems, and that's frustrating because, nobody should be told, don't worry. And who knows? Maybe that was a preemptive strike they did, that they actually have zero worries that these are going to hold up, and they just did that to assuage the fears of people who had either heard of the issues or had a MacBook Pro and desperately want a more powerful MacBook Pro, but don't want to deal with the keyboard pain. Oh my goodness, what a mess. And at the end of our giant list of pain and trauma, there's a whole bunch of people talking about this. A friend of mine forwarded this to me. Zach Whitaker had a tweet to the TechCrunch, one of the TechCrunch articles. That's kind of where I noticed it. My friend forwarded that tweet to me. Zach Whitaker tweeted, "New thousands of TP-Link routers are vulnerable to a remote hijack vulnerability, according to @MabsSec. Given the severity of the bug, TP-Link released a patch, but never posted it on its website."
Oh.
Yeah. Bug was discovered in January 2018. It is described as a low-skilled attacker, which people I know might refer to as a script kiddie.
Yeah, exactly what I was just thinking.
And basically, they're hijacking routers with default passwords. By the way, you shouldn't leave the default password on your router. I assume no one listening to This Week in Computer Hardware would do that. But
mine's safe. Admin and then admin for the password. That's safe. All lowercase.
Well, it just makes it easy to remember. TP-Link didn't update the firmware page until after TechCrunch contacted them. And this is this is pretty frustrating. This is bad. I don't even know how to address this. What's really depressing about this is TP-Link knew this was a problem because they told TechCrunch that the update was, quote, currently available when requested from tech support. And then after TechCrunch contacted them, they decided to actually push the patch out. This is staggeringly shoddy behavior and really, really frustrating.
It almost makes you think there should be it makes me think there should be a national recall or, notification system, just like when there's a safety issue with a piece of equipment you bought for your kid. Like I've gotten things in the mail because I own a certain car seat or crib or piece of IKEA furniture that might tip over. Maybe if you have a router that you bought that's a security risk and you registered it, you could get a card in the mail or an email or a text notification on your phone saying, hey, download the latest update because you're vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that's interesting here in the great state of California, where we have one of the most complicated set of laws in the planet, much less the United States, is we actually do have Senate Bill number 327, the security, basically Title 1.81.26, this is security of connected devices. And this is, good, I think, on some level. But, a manufacturer of a connected device shall equip the device with a reasonable security feature or features that are all of the following: appropriate to the nature and function of the device, appropriate to the information it may collect, obtain, or transmit, designed to protect the device and any information contained therein from unauthorized access, destruction, use, modification, or disclosure. It kind of goes on and on, but the part that really caught my eye was that the pre-programmed password is unique to each device manufacturer. And I've seen devices like this where they're actually, there's a sticker essentially that's applied to the device as part of the manufacturing process that gives you the unique password. And I'm pretty sure my Netgear Orbi had that. And that has a security feature that requires a user to generate a new means of authentication before access is granted to the device for the first time. So this is, there's a reason there's a Twitter feed called the Internet of, stuff, except they don't say stuff. They say the word that your mom made you eat soap for saying in front of her. Poop would be a simile for that word. But not a simile. Goodness. Simile is a comparison using
I was going to
micrographs.
say is
Synonym is the word I was looking for. And
is it automatopoeia? Is that the origin of that word? Is this an unusual word?
We promised not to get too deep into etymology after the etymology dense word history in pre-show, but so because we got like 37 or 39 million people, which is like 10% of the population of the United States, this is probably going to impact a lot of manufacturers to do some of these things, or it'll be tied up in courts forever. I don't know the current status other than it's been signed into law and sent to the Secretary of State. But, there is no one who does security that is not profoundly shocked and or dismayed and or depressed about the incredibly poor security practices on a lot of devices that people are purchasing, whether they are web cameras that goes into the house or connected devices, or like, hey, your light bulbs may be a threat vector to attack your network. And for most people, nobody cares, not in my neighborhood. And nobody cares until something happens that radically impacts their life in a negative way. So I'm down with more security being added to this, because the other thing is, insecure devices have allowed skilled attackers to create massive online, botnets or swarm nets that they can use to attack websites, to do distributed denial of service attacks. You get, 5 ants and they get stomped. You get 500 million ants. Everything in the neighborhood gets eaten to the ground. In any case, that's enough of the mildly depressing legal segment of This Week in Computer Hardware this week, but just a ton of stuff dropped this week. You're a big fan of EVGA's new audio card. It's a fairly sophisticated device for a discerning user. It is a sound card, as in it is a PCIe device that goes inside of a desktop PC, and sound comes out of the back of it, or digital audio signals. That's
the general idea, yes.
Yeah, but a lot of younger people in the audience have not had to purchase one. They dropped the price and they added some shiny to it.
Yeah, it's a free. They advertise it as a free. It's just a software update, but what it adds is the sort of simulated surround effects that you would have expected from like a gamer-focused card, the Nahimic Gaming, positional audio effects. They're 3D audio for gaming. So that is just added to the dashboard. You can enable the effects. You can choose a different reverb, kind of like an environment setting for different room sizes. It's got some built-in compression, like loudness control for nighttime listening, and they kind of tweaked how the software works a little bit to make it easier to use. But the takeaway from this for me was they were advertising this as a software update, but at the same time, they had done this $50 instant rebate at their own website. And then within the next few days, I saw the price for the new audio card drop to $199 on Amazon, and then a couple of days later at Best Buy. So now everywhere that I've seen this listed, it's $199. So that is much more competitive with like the Asus Essence STX2, which is like a $260 card, but usually sells for closer to $200 on Amazon. And then Sound Blaster has a high-end card, the Z, I'm looking at it right here, ZXR audiophile grade gaming card that's $200 as well. So now they're more competitive, and they offer that like option of the 3D positional simulated surround stuff for headphones and speakers. So it makes a lot of sense. This was a hard sell at $250 when it's straight up 2-channel stereo only. Then it was, people like me, the very few who listen to, well-recorded music in high-resolution audio files and want something dedicated to 2-channel, where normally you'd have like a little stack next to your computer of like a little headphone amp and a DAC, and usually around $200 is fair for a pair of those on the low end. But just makes it a little bit more enticing if you have a build that has space for a sound card. As if you have a laptop, you can't use this, it's not USB. And if you have a mini ICX board, then you're already using that PCI Express slot for your graphics card probably. But This is for those big, no holds barred gaming builds when you can spend $200 on a sound card. It sounds really good.
I'm excited. The other thing that was exciting this week, Lenovo. We went through a spate a couple years ago, Ryan and I, where it was like, the PC is dying, the PC is dead, nobody's going to buy desktop PCs, nobody buys PCs, it's all about the phones. And now we're in a cycle where phone sales have flatlined. But Lenovo made a lot of money. Lenovo Group Limited reported they had, I want to say, tripled their quarterly profits. Quote, helped by strong personal computer PCs sales, and that they were not being impacted by the Sino-U.S. trade war. This is, PC and smart devices revenue went up 10%. PC shipments grew 9%. And this is partially a big deal because their net profit was $118 million, which was much better than the year prior when they had a write down. It's also interesting. Lenovo said that they're moving. They're planning. They have contingency plans. They're going to shift production to India, Mexico, Hungary, Brazil, and the United States. They haven't done that yet, but they're obviously laying the groundwork should the trade war continue. Global PC shipments went down 4.6% during the same quarter that their PC shipments went up. So, I guess global PC sales are still on the downwards trend, but thanks to, I think, new GPUs, more opportunities for gaming, and the fact that systems are getting kind of powerful and interesting, at least some people, at least Lenovo customers, seem to be buying a whole bunch of new PCs. What is also crazy is they did like $51 billion in revenue for the year. $600 million in profit, or $597 million in profit, and last year they lost a bit under $200 million. So, yay for financial stability and PC sales. And I saw this, and I'm kind of seriously in love with it. This is a new gaming device. So Panic has announced Playdate, and it's tiny, and it has a crank, and it has 12 bundled games that are going to be time released, one per week, and it's going to release in 2020. It's going to sell for $149. The creators of Katamari are on board to make a game. Bennett Foddy, who did QWOP, The Last Rockets designer, several other really cool people. Quote, the games will remain a surprise until magically delivered to your device. Once the game unlocks, it'll be available to play forever, and Panic says it'll consider adding additional seasons depending on how sales of the device go. So instead of having cartridges or making you purchase things online, it actually, they give you 12 games, one per week. So pre-orders are going to start later this year. Not sure which countries it's going to be available in, but it's Wi-Fi, it's got Bluetooth, USB-C, a headphone jack, and the screen is actually black and white. And the crank doesn't charge it. It's a, quote, unique control option. Or as Panic says, think of the crank like an analog stick, but one you can turn endlessly. Which just sounds so peculiar when I say it out loud.
I keep on watching this animation as it shows controlling a side scroller with the crank.
Yeah,
and I'm looking. It just looks like this should be a handheld fishing game. But
yeah, no, I'm sure someone will do one. So
yeah, it's odd.
So Keita Takahashi, who did Katamari Damacy, which is one of the most incredible games of all time, that thing you were looking at with the little dude, that's Crankin's time travel adventure. Quote, this game uses the crank exclusively to control the flow of time backwards and forwards. Your goal, get Crankin to his date with Crankette while avoiding an ever-increasing series of ridiculous obstacles that aren't affected by the time control. Will Crankin make it to his rendezvous on time? So, I'm really curious. Play also says this is not a game. It is black and white. It's not a Game Boy screen. There's no grid lines, no blurring. It is extremely sharp and clear, has much higher resolution. Quote, it sounds odd to say, but it's a truly premium black and white screen. So I'm I'm kind of excited about this one. I am kind of excited about this one. And I never get excited about new game platforms because I saw so many sort of independent open source streaming devices kind of crash and burn. But if nothing else, this will be a relatively inexpensive gaming device that has, hopefully 12 games released for it, the first season of games. And they've got some really cool people that have promised to make games for this, indie developers. You may not be into sort of indie games or stuff that feels old school, but I'm excited. I'm waiting eagerly for the pre-order on this one. So
with bated breath.
Breath is thoroughly baited, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my goodness! If you are curious about what's going on in the not premium price premium phone world, check out techthing.com. Shannon did a nice review. Mentioned earlier a nice review of the OnePlus 7 Pro, and it was crazy. If you're looking at the video right now, there is a pop-up selfie camera that comes up out of the top of the OnePlus 7 Pro, and my immediate reaction was like, "Oh, what happens when I drop the phone?" Because eventually I drop every phone because I'm a sad creature that does not deserve nice technology. And Shannon drops it, and it literally retracts, in like half a second. It senses, it senses that it is falling, and it retracts the camera to protect the camera, which I thought was astoundingly cool. If you're a camera nerd, definitely check out Shannon's review on this one, and it is pretty impressive. Also, as we were discussing memory earlier, available in a 12 gigabyte of memory, 12 gigabyte of RAM, 256 gigabyte version. Most people, if you don't know that you need 12 gigabytes of RAM, save yourself a bunch of money and get the 6 or 8 gigabyte version, which is also available with 256 gigabytes of RAM, an amount of RAM that I wish was available on perhaps Google's Pixel 3a. Oh, if it only had a micro SD card slot. Also, there is no headphone jack on this one. So the death of the headphone jack continues. Just wanted to mention that. So, yeah. And now I'm back looking at pictures of little yellow friendly Portland designed gaming device. So that's probably the sign that we're just about ready to wrap this week in computer hardware. Anything you want to tease coming up outside of your impending discussion of what may or may not be announced by AMD at Computex? I assume you will not be going to Computex, sir?
I am not. I believe our trusty owner and managing editor, Jim, will be. That's at least the plan right now. But it's just going to be a Computex week. I think it would be kind of foolish to attempt more hardware reviews. I put out like 5 or 6 in the last week or so, and it'll just be buried by the Computex news. So it's all Computex next week. All the press releases will start coming down. There won't be enough time to write everything up. So expect to see the usual glut of new announcements from every single company. Because like you said at the top, this Computex is the computer show. There's stuff that companies show at CES, but that was always more of a consumer-focused show, hence the name. Computex is new motherboards, new cases, new power supplies, new peripherals from all these companies. And it's compounded by the fact that Lisa Su is giving the keynote and there will be Zen 2 stuff. So it's just going to be a tremendous news week.
We wait, ladies and gentlemen, with bated breath. That's it for this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. If it's your first show, do us a favor, go over to twit.tv/TWICH. You're going to find links to all of our older shows and pretty much how to subscribe on any platform that we know of in the known universe. And we want to thank you so much for listening or watching. We got an audio version, we got a video version, and we invite you to watch all of them multiple times just so you can catch every snarky witticism and insightful hardware story we bring.
Hey, and a special shout out to everybody watching right now on their On tablet from Walmart.
Let us know. Tweet at Sebastian
how was the experience?
At Patrick Norton how you like the On tablet. Oh, goodness. I sense an intriguing week of excitement and pain coming up for me. And I will be back, hopefully, to talk about it next week. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching or listening. I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Sebastian Peak.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.